Hey guys, and welcome back to Coops Gaming. Today I'm going to continue the dev diaries for my disc golf game that I was working on. And today I've decided that I'm going to demonstrate or go through the scripts that I have compiled and written uh, for the sake of this game. Some of this information will be taken from other people's guides and instructions. Some of this is going to be completely original. Um, we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. Uh, so let's start with the critical FPS controller. 100% of the FPS controller is taken from the standard Unity assets, which is a little bit hard to access, and I'm not going to go through a guide on how to get to that right now. But just know that the standard Unity assets are not so standard anymore and are kind of difficult to get to at times if you don't know what you're doing. So that's that. Then all three disks use the same script, which is under this pickup v1 here. So pickup v1 has a few functions or fields, functions and fields and functions, values, variables. At the top we have throw force, which is utilized to determine exactly how much force we're adding to this disk as it is thrown, and that changes. No, that stays the same for every disk. You'll see down here that I've actually made it a random value that is changed as long as you are holding it. So every time the game updates or runs an update function, if you are holding the disk, it changes the value of throw force to somewhere between 300 and 400. So you're not going to get exactly the same throw force every time you throw the disk. And the reason I did that is to simulate the fact that not every human being, and by that I mean most, have full, perfect control over the power of their muscles. I added Tor Force. Tor Force is a completely original thing. This wasn't borrowed from anyone else's video, and that's because I wanted the disc to spin, is why I added it to this. So you'll see down here, just below the add force where we're throwing it, we're also adding torque to make it spin. Object position is just how we are determining where it is. Float distance is determining how far away the disc is from the player, which down here you can see that we're calculating distance based on the item's position compared to its parent's position, which in the system we are telling it that the parent is a guide that is attached to the player object. So it calculates how far away that is, and if you are too far away, you are not allowed to pick up the disc, so you can't be halfway across the map and picking it up. Next we have this wind boolean, which is just determining whether or not the disc is in a wind zone. If it is in a wind zone, then it will be affected by the wind. If it's not in a wind zone, it's not affected by the wind. Then we have grounded. When I first included the wind, I did not have grounded, and so if you were holding the disc while in a wind zone, you would see the disc just flying away from your hand gradually, and I decided that wasn't a good idea. So I added the grounded feature. So now if the wind zone touches the ground and the disc is either on the ground or in your hand, it will not be affected by the wind. However, as soon as you throw it, which you can see down here, and I'll get to that in a bit, it changes grounded to false, so now it can be affected by the wind under the wind bull function here. So yeah, that was a cool little thing that I had to figure out. Yeah, there it is. On trigger, enter. If grounded is false, then it can also be affected by the wind. Next we have the game object wind info. That's just being able to reference wind objects, which we'll go over the wind object in a little bit because I had to do most of my finagling in the wind object to make it work the way I wanted to. We created a boolean of can we hold the disk, though I don't think that's used at all at the moment. The item is the disk itself. The temp parent is the guide that I mentioned earlier. and then a boolean of if it's holding or not. That determines the physics of the disk. If you are holding it, it's not affected by gravity. If you are not holding it, it is affected by gravity, that sort of thing. And then we get to our actual functions. So the update function is run by Unity at a set pace. It happens faster than the human mind can see, or the human eye can see. Recalculates the distance of the disk from the guide every second. If the distance is a certain distance, you automatically drop the disk. So if it gets stuck behind an object and you walk away, it just drops. When you click E, you can just pick up the disk. If holding is true, so while you're holding the disk, you can, or we set the velocity of the object to equal your own velocity. Same with angular velocity, and we set the parent to the temporary parent, so it will stay in a relative position based on you. And then we have this throw force command that I mentioned earlier that lets you throw it at a variable every single time. And then when we right click, we throw the disk, which is add force based on your direction and the force of the throw, which was determined here, here, and add relative torque to give the disk spin. If you are not holding it, it just kind of sits, which is fine. And if it is in the wind, it is affected by the wind's power and wind direction, which we'll go over when we get to the wind portion. When we do a left mouse click down, we set is holding to true, much like if we clicked E, we just set it to true. And so it stops being affected by gravity. It can detect collisions, so it can get stuck behind objects. But we freeze its rotation on the X and Z plane so that it does not rotate while we move it. When we lift the mouse up, it just drops the disk. On trigger exit, so when it leaves the wind area, it stops being affected by the wind. When it enters the wind, it starts getting affected by the wind. And when it touches the floor, it becomes grounded. Very simple stuff. I could go into this in more specific detail, but these are the basics to get it working. You could theoretically copy and paste all of this, which I might upload this to a Git at some point to make it possible. So the next object we have, let me go back to my prefabs criticals. We've done the disks. So let me show you another thing that we can do here. Each of the disks has a different rigid body mass, and that's so that they fly at different distances based on how much they should weigh for the size of the disk. I don't have wind resistance perfectly in the game yet, and by that I mean not at all. I have a simulated wind force, but not a wind resistance. And so the best way to simulate a larger disk was just to add mass to it. But next we'll go to obstacles wind. So with the wind, the first thing I wanted to do was have a force that was visible to the player but wouldn't stop the disk. It would just move the disk's path trajectory. This makes the game a little bit more interesting, in my opinion, because it makes it a little bit harder. You have to know how the wind is going, get an expectation of what direction it's going to cause your disk to fly in. And in my original iteration of this, that wasn't really fair because your player could not see where the wind was blowing, how hard it was blowing. So I wanted to add a particle system to show which direction it blew. And that was the trickiest part of the wind. So to show how that works, let's open up the wind area here. A large chunk of this was taken directly from the golf simulator game that I linked in the previous video. However, once we get down to the update portion, I included the ability to transform and rotate the particle, which in this case the particle looks like a leaf, so that it is facing the same direction as the wind direction and blowing at a speed that matches the wind's power. So up here we have a single step to calculate how fast this change of the wind should be. I might make it later on in the game such that the wind changes direction over time. And so this portion of the script would also change the particle direction and speed based on that. New direction calculates what direction we want to move the particles in based on the wind direction. Draw ray isn't really doing anything, it's just for a debugging so I can see if it's functioning correctly. And then the rotation function actually rotates the particles one step in the correct direction every time it updates at the appropriate ratio, or the appropriate speed that I've provided, which right now is a speed of 10.0f. This, I could not find any YouTube guides on how to do this, but I knew that if I could figure out a way to calculate the angle of direction that the wind was pointing in based on its directions, that I would be able to tell the game to rotate the particles in that same direction. And it turns out that Unity does have this rotate towards function, which does exactly that. You just have to feed it a couple of vectors to get it to go that way. So that was fun. Let's see, are there any other scripts that are worth mentioning? Oh yeah, the spawn disk script. This one's pretty easy. It exists on my player controller, though you could theoretically put it on anything. And all it does is say when you click Z or X or C, it spawns the appropriate disk, whether that be the driver, the mid-range, or the putter. Let's see, we've covered WindArea, we've covered pickup. Let's look at scripts here. These are just all off of the standard scripts, and I've just relocated them. So that covers it for scripts right now. There is one more script that I know I need to write, which is the congratulations, you got it in the bucket script, which will be coming a little bit later. Let me make sure here that I have, I got a new asset from a friend of mine. Let me find where I want to put this. I'm going to put it in prefabs, new folder. Gold. And just slide this in here. And this should, oh, that didn't open like I wanted to. Alright, I'll have to Google how to actually do that import, but theoretically I've got my disc golf basket. Which I'm really appreciative towards that friend for making for me. So, thank you if you see this. I don't know what name you want to go by for the general public, so I'll just leave it as anonymous at the moment. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please tune in for the next episode coming next Friday. Bye.